The sound a masterpiece makes when it dies isn't a crash. It's a sharp, clean crack like a bone snapping. My masterpiece, a 1/200 scale model of the Millennium Tower, took 400 hours to build. It took Julian Croft less than a second to destroy it. He did it with a smile on his face and a heavy, steel ruler in his hand, right in front of 20 of the most powerful investors in New York City. They just watched. Silent. Complicit. Their collective gasp was the only sound in the vast, glass-walled boardroom, a sound quickly swallowed by the chilling quiet that followed. They stared at the wreckage of balsa wood, acrylic, and shattered dreams on the polished mahogany table, then at me. But I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. A strange, cold clarity washed over me. This wasn't an ending. This was the beginning. My name is Catalina Hopkins. For the past 2 years, I've been a junior architect at Croft Designs, a firm synonymous with breathtaking skylines and architectural genius. Or so the world thought. I came here with stars in my eyes, believing that architecture was a public trust, a promise of safety and beauty etched in steel and stone. I believed in Julian Croft. Everyone did. He was the charismatic visionary on the cover of design magazines, the man who spoke of building legacies, not just buildings. He had a way of looking at you that made you feel like you were the only person in the world who understood his grand vision. It was all a magnificent lie. I'd spent the last 18 months meticulously documenting that lie, piece by piece, email by email, falsified report by falsified report. He was a con artist who built his empire on faulty concrete and fabricated safety tests, and I was going to be the one to prove it. The presentation had started perfectly. The investors were captivated. My model of the Millennium Tower was the crown jewel of the pitch, a symphony of sustainable design and structural integrity. Every beam was placed with purpose, every material chosen for longevity and safety, far exceeding city codes. That was the problem. My design was honest. It was also 5% over Julian's hidden, criminally low budget. Catalina's work is meticulous, Julian began, his voice smooth as silk as he circled the table. He picked up the heavy engineer's ruler, tapping it lightly against his palm. She has a gift for detail, a real passion for the craft. He paused beside me, placing a hand on my shoulder. It felt like a block of ice. But passion, unfortunately, doesn't always align with ambition. Vision requires boldness, a willingness to push boundaries. He looked from the model to the investors. This design, he said with a sigh of theatrical disappointment, is safe, it's competent. But it lacks the soul, the daring that defines a Croft creation. And then it happened. Before I could process his words, he raised the ruler high and brought it down with sickening force right on the tower's central spire. The crack echoed in the tomb-like silence. He didn't stop. He brought it down again and again, shattering the delicate facade, crushing the miniature atrium, splintering the supports. It was a frenzy of controlled violence, a performance for the men in their $1,000 suits. He was showing them he was in control, that he was the one with the vision, and that anyone who dared to present a reality that contradicted his narrative would be, quite literally, smashed. When he was done, he calmly placed the ruler back on the table, not a single hair out of place. He brushed a speck of dust from his custom-tailored jacket. "Now," he said, his smile returning as if nothing had happened, "let me show you the schematics for the real Millennium Tower, the one that will make history." The investors, after a moment of stunned silence, began to murmur their approval. They saw a strong leader, a man unafraid to make hard decisions. They didn't see the truth I saw. They didn't see a cornered animal destroying the evidence of his own fraud. My model wasn't just a design, it was a physical manifestation of the safety standards he planned to ignore. By destroying it, he thought he was silencing me. I met his gaze across the table, my expression unreadable. I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if accepting his verdict. Then I turned and walked out of the boardroom. I didn't run. My steps were measured, my back straight. I could feel their eyes on me, a mixture of pity, discomfort, and relief that it wasn't them. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, sealing them in their world of comfortable lies. I walked directly to the elevator, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the marble floor. I didn't go to the bathroom to compose myself. I didn't go to HR to file a complaint that would be buried by morning. Inside the mirrored elevator, as the doors slid silently closed, I pulled out my phone. My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. It was beating with a slow, powerful purpose. I scrolled to one number, a number I knew was the first real step in my plan. It rang twice. "Elena," I said, my voice as steady as steel. "It's Catalina." "Catty, honey, what is it? You're in the big presentation right now." Her voice was warm, familiar, the voice of my godmother, Dr. Alina Rios, one of the most respected structural engineers in the country. "He did it," I said simply, watching my own cold reflection in the polished steel. "He destroyed the model in front of everyone." There was a pause on the line, but it wasn't one of shock. It was the pause of a strategist processing a critical move on the chessboard. "Did you get the pieces?" she asked, her tone shifting from godmother to professional. "I'm going back for them now," I replied. "I'll say I'm clearing my desk." "Good," she said. "Every splinter is evidence. His public display of rage in front of investors is the final piece of the puzzle. It establishes a pattern of unstable and threatening behavior. We have everything now, Catalina." 18 months. For 18 months, I had played the part of the eager, brilliant protégé. I worked late, arrived early, and earned Julian's trust. And all the while, I was building a second, secret project. It started with a discrepancy I found in the concrete specifications for a project in Dubai. The purchase order was for a lower grade than what the structural plans required. I flagged it, and Julian told me it was a simple clerical error. But then I found the clerical error on 3 other projects. I started digging. Late at night, using a secure connection, I accessed the company's servers. I found 2 sets of books. 2 sets of architectural plans, one for the clients and city inspectors, and one for the contractors, detailing the cheaper, substandard materials they were actually supposed to use. I found emails from Julian pressuring junior engineers to sign off on safety reports they knew were false. I photographed everything, saved every file to an encrypted drive, and sent a copy to a secure vault that only Alina knew about. He was building glass towers that were death traps, and I had the proof. But proof of fraud wasn't enough. I needed to show the world the man behind it, the bully who ruled through intimidation. His ego was his greatest weakness, and I knew that my meticulously honest model, presented in front of his biggest investors, would be an insult he couldn't bear. I had gambled that he would react not like a CEO, but like a tyrant, and I had won. "I'll be at my office all night," Alina said, pulling me back to the present. "Bring everything. We'll draft the letter to the state licensing board first. Then we go to the district attorney." "Thank you, Alina," I said, a genuine warmth finally entering my voice. "He made the mistake of thinking you were just another gifted kid he could exploit," she said, her voice turning to ice. "He forgot you were my goddaughter. He forgot who taught you how to read a blueprint." I smiled as the elevator doors opened to the lobby. The sun streamed through the atrium, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was living in the shadows. Julian Croft thought he had made a statement by destroying my work. He thought he had silenced a subordinate. He had no idea he'd just handed me the very blueprint I needed for his own demolition. The war had begun. Alina's office was the complete antithesis of Croft Designs. Where Julian's space was a monument to ego, all chrome, glass, and stark white emptiness, Alina was a sanctuary of knowledge. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves overflowed with engineering texts, structural analyses, and case studies. Blueprints were stacked on every available surface. It smelled of old paper, strong coffee, and the quiet hum of powerful computers processing complex load-bearing calculations. This was a room where truth was found in numbers, not in narratives. I carefully laid the splintered pieces of my model on her large drafting table. Alina, wearing a simple black turtleneck and with her silver hair tied back in a practical knot, examined the wreckage with a forensic intensity. "He didn't just break it," she murmured, gently touching a fractured support beam. "He pulverized it. This isn't the act of a critic. This is the act of a man terrified of being exposed." We spent the next 3 hours assembling our case. We laid out the authentic blueprints next to the falsified versions. We cross-referenced Julian's emails ordering cheaper steel rebar with the official project specifications promising high-tensile strength. The evidence was a mountain, damning, and irrefutable. "This is more than enough to get his license suspended, Catty," Alina said, her expression grim. "But to truly dismantle his operation, we need an inside witness. Someone who can testify to the culture of fear he cultivated." That led me to Leo. Leo was a senior draftsman, a quiet man who had worked at the firm for 20 years. He'd seen everything. He was a master of his craft, but he kept his head down, a ghost in the machine. I knew approaching him was a risk. He had a wife, a mortgage, a daughter in college. He had everything to lose. I met him at a small coffee shop in Brooklyn the next morning, far from the prying eyes of Midtown Manhattan. His hands, usually so steady on a blueprint, trembled slightly as he held his cup. "Catalina, I don't know," he said, his voice barely a whisper after I laid out the situation. Julian, he's not just a boss, he's vindictive. Do you remember Mark Renshaw from Structural about 5 years ago? He questioned the wind shear calculations for the Azure building. Julian didn't just fire him, he blacklisted him, called every major firm in the country. Mark is designing strip malls in Ohio now. I know the risk, Leo, I said, looking him directly in the eye. But the Millennium Tower, the calculations he's pushing through, it's not just wrong, it's dangerous. We're talking about catastrophic failure in a high wind event. We're talking about people's lives. He looked away, torn. I can't, he finally said, shaking his head. I'm sorry, Catalina, I just can't. My heart sank, but I understood. Fear was the mortar Julian used to build his empire. As I left the coffee shop, my phone buzzed. It was an official email from HR. My employment at Croft Designs had been terminated, effective immediately, for creative insubordination and unprofessional conduct. Julian was already trying to paint his narrative, to frame me as a disgruntled, difficult employee. An hour later, a second email arrived. This one was from Julian's personal account. Catalina, it began, oozing false sincerity. I was so sorry to hear about the board's decision. I fought for you, truly. Your talent is undeniable, just a bit unrefined. Perhaps this is for the best. I would be happy to make a call on your behalf to a smaller boutique firm where your specific style might be a better fit. Let me know how I can help. The condescension was suffocating. It was a threat wrapped in a silk bow. He was testing me, trying to see if I would go away quietly. It was time to show him I wouldn't. That night, I created an anonymous email address and sent a single, carefully chosen document to a small but fiercely respected architectural blog called Design Deconstructed. The document was an internal memo from a previous project, the Horizon Condos. In it, Julian publicly blamed a junior engineer for a series of foundation cracks that had appeared after construction. Attached to that memo, I included a second document, Julian's own internal email to the project manager, sent 3 months earlier, explicitly ordering the use of a cheaper, lower-grade concrete mix to expedite the foundation pour and stay under budget. It was a simple, undeniable lie. I didn't add any commentary. I just sent the files with the subject line, "The cracks in the foundation." It took 2 days for the story to break. At first, it was just a small article on the blog. But it was well-researched. The blogger had independently verified the authenticity of the memos. The story was picked up by larger trade publications. Questions started to swirl. The junior engineer Julian had scapegoated, now working in another city, confirmed the story. Julian Croft, the industry's golden boy, had thrown a young subordinate under the bus to cover his own cost-cutting measures. For the first time, a crack appeared in his perfect facade. His response was swift. My phone rang late on Thursday night. It was an unknown number. I answered and hit record. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Julian's voice was a low snarl, stripped of all its usual charm. "You think you can hide behind some anonymous email and ruin me? I built this city's skyline. I will bury you, Catalina. I will make it so you can't even get a job designing a garage. I will erase you from this industry." "Is that a threat, Julian?" I asked, my voice calm. "It's a promise," he hissed, and the line went dead. I saved the recording. It was a federal offense to retaliate against a whistleblower. He had just handed me another weapon. The blog post also rattled the investors. The following morning, Alina got a call from one of her contacts. A major investment group in the Millennium Tower project had demanded an independent audit of all construction materials, citing reputational risk. Julian's lies were starting to have financial consequences. The board of directors, however, stood by him, releasing a statement dismissing the article as malicious rumors from a disgruntled former employee. They were circling the wagons, protecting their asset. But the story had reached further than I could have hoped. That afternoon, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was just my name. "My name is Clara Vance," the email read. "I was a project lead at Croft Designs 5 years ago. I read the article on Design Deconstructed. What happened to that young engineer? The same thing happened to me. I have information. I've been too scared to come forward for years, but I'm not scared anymore. Can we talk?" We met that evening. Clara was a sharp, determined woman with haunted eyes. She told me how she had been fired after raising concerns about the fire suppression systems in a hotel project. Julian had not only fired her, but had also threatened to sue her into bankruptcy if she ever spoke about it, forcing her to sign an ironclad NDA. "He said he had a special file on me," Clara said, her hands shaking as she recounted the memory. That he knew things about my family that I wouldn't want made public. He was terrifying. But Clara had been smart. Before she left, she had copied the entire project server onto a series of encrypted hard drives. She had everything, the original designs, the altered orders, the threatening emails. She had been waiting 5 years for a moment for an ally. The final piece fell into place the next day. I got a text from Leo. "Meet me, same place." When I arrived at the coffee shop, he looked different. The fear in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet resolve. He slid a small USB drive across the table. "Clara Vance was my friend," he said softly. "I watched what he did to her. I did nothing. I've lived with that for 5 years. I'm not going to do nothing again." That drive has a backdoor login to the primary server archives. The real archives, the ones the IT department doesn't even know I maintain. It has everything, every project, every lie, from the very beginning. He looked up at me. "Take him down, Catalina. Take him down for all of us." That night, in Alina's office with Clara on speakerphone, we opened the files. It was a decade of corruption, more extensive than I had ever imagined. And then we found it. The smoking gun. A shell corporation registered in Delaware called Apex Structural Materials. The company's sole purpose was to act as a middleman, purchasing cheap, often non-compliant materials from overseas and selling them at a massive markup to craft designs for its most prestigious projects. The director of Apex Structural Materials was listed as a JC Holdings. Julian Croft Holdings. He wasn't just cutting corners. He was committing massive, systemic fraud, funneling millions of dollars from his clients' projects directly into his own pockets while putting thousands of lives at risk. Alina leaned back in her chair, a grim smile on her face. "It's over," she said. "This isn't just a licensing issue anymore. This is a criminal conspiracy. Racketeering. This goes straight to the district attorney." Our plan had just gotten much, much bigger. We weren't just taking on a man anymore. We were taking on his entire criminal enterprise. And we finally had the blueprint to do it. The takedown wasn't a single, dramatic explosion. It was a series of controlled demolitions, each one strategically targeting a core pillar of Julian's empire. Our first move was to schedule an emergency hearing with the State Architectural Licensing Board. We didn't just file a complaint. Alina, acting as our legal counsel, presented a formal 80-page dossier. It included Julian's altered blueprints, the damning chemical analysis of the concrete from the Horizon condos, and most importantly, a signed, notarized affidavit from Leo, confessing his role in altering the plans under duress and providing the server access logs to prove it. The hearing, which was supposed to be a quiet, procedural affair, became the first tremor of the earthquake. When faced with Alina's meticulous, irrefutable engineering analysis and Leo's insider testimony, the board had no choice. They voted unanimously to immediately suspend Julian Croft's architectural license pending a full criminal investigation. The news hit the industry wire services within the hour. Julian Croft, the Starchitect, was legally barred from practicing architecture. His projects, including the half-started Millennium Tower, were frozen, the construction sites padlocked. The second detonation came from Clara Vance. Armed with the evidence of Julian's criminal fraud, a judge ruled that her NDA was void as it was an instrument used to conceal a crime. Free to speak, she gave a devastating on-the-record interview to the New York Times. She laid out the entire story of the faulty fire suppression systems, the threats, the cover-up. Her story, combined with the news of Julian's suspended license, created a firestorm. Suddenly, the narrative wasn't about a disgruntled employee anymore. It was about a pattern of abuse and corruption. This was the signal our quiet network had been waiting for. Within 48 hours, 3 more architects and engineers, all former employees who had been silenced or fired by Julian, came forward with their own stories, backed by their own hoarded evidence. They contacted the district attorney's office directly. Julian's corporate chemotherapy had failed. The cancer he'd tried to cut out had metastasized into an army of witnesses against him. The financial pillar was the next to fall. The investors who had watched him smash my model now saw him not as a bold visionary, but as a catastrophic liability. They filed a massive lawsuit for fraud and misrepresentation, and a judge, citing the overwhelming evidence, agreed to freeze all of Julian's personal and corporate assets. The money he'd siphoned off through Apex Structural Materials was now untouchable, locked away pending the outcome of the criminal trial. The man who lived in a $100 million penthouse was suddenly unable to use his own credit cards. The final and most satisfying collapse was Julian himself. Stripped of his power, his money, and his reputation, he became erratic. He left rambling, threatening voicemails for the board members. He sent unhinged emails to the journalists covering the story. Each message was another nail in his legal coffin, another charge of witness intimidation added to the growing list. The DA's office didn't have to build a case. Julian was delivering it to them daily. He was arrested a week later, not in his pristine office, but in the lobby of a hotel where he was trying to meet with a foreign investor in an attempt to illegally move assets offshore. The perp walk footage was on every news channel. The great Julian Croft in a wrinkled suit, his face a mask of rage and disbelief, being led away in handcuffs. He looked small, powerless. 9 months later, I sat in the front row of a packed courtroom and watched the jury foreman deliver the verdict. Guilty, on all counts. Racketeering, conspiracy to commit fraud, reckless endangerment. 127 times, the word guilty echoed through the silent room. Julian, who had maintained his arrogance throughout the trial, finally broke. The facade crumbled, revealing the pathetic, terrified man underneath. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in federal prison. He wouldn't be eligible for parole until he was in his late 70s. As they led him away, his eyes met mine for a fleeting second. I saw no remorse, only a final, desperate flicker of hatred. I didn't smile. I didn't feel a rush of victory. I just felt quiet. The noise that had filled my life for nearly 2 years was finally over. My new beginning started not with a grand gesture, but with a simple act of creation. With a small business loan and seed money from a group of ethical investors who had followed the case, Elena and I started our own firm, Rios Hopkins Design Studio. Our first hires were Leo, as head of our drafting department, and Clara, as our lead project manager. We didn't set up in a flashy glass tower in Midtown. We found a beautiful, sunlit loft space in an old warehouse in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Our first project wasn't a skyscraper. It was a pro bono contract to design a new community center in a low-income neighborhood. We involved the community in every step, holding workshops, listening to their needs, and using sustainable, locally sourced materials. We were building with people, not just for them. It was healing. Every honest blueprint we drew, every safety inspection we passed, every collaborative meeting we held was an act of reclamation. We were reclaiming the integrity of our profession. I was reclaiming the joy of my craft. The happiness I found wasn't in Julian's downfall, but in the simple, profound satisfaction of doing good work with good people. My new family wasn't defined by blood, but by shared values and a collective belief that we could build a better world. A few months after we opened, I was invited to speak at my old university. Standing at the podium, looking out at a sea of young, hopeful faces, I thought about what to say. I didn't talk about Julian. I didn't talk about revenge. A great design isn't measured by the height of a building, but by the strength and integrity of its foundation, I told them. And the same is true for your careers. Build your foundation on truth. Build it on collaboration. Build it on the unwavering belief that your work is a promise to the people who will live, work, and gather in the spaces you create. That is a legacy that can never be broken. After the talk, I launched the website for the Blueprint Foundation, a nonprofit funded by a portion of our firm's profits. It provides free legal support and mentorship for young architects and engineers who need to blow the whistle on unethical practices in the industry. Clara is its executive director. The final scene of my story isn't in a courtroom. It's on a sunny afternoon at the grand opening of the new community center. The space is alive with the sound of children laughing, music playing, and neighbors sharing food. I'm not on a stage, I'm just part of the crowd. Elena is beside me, watching a group of teenagers paint a mural on a wall we designed. Leo is showing his daughter the intricate, exposed beamwork he drafted. Clara is organizing a game of soccer in the new courtyard. I touch my cheek, the place where I could almost feel the phantom sting of humiliation from that day in the boardroom. The mark is long gone, but something permanent was left in its place. Not a scar, but a blueprint. A plan for a new life, built on the wreckage of the old one. He thought that slap, that act of destruction, would silence me. Instead, it showed me exactly what I needed to build. And as I watch a little girl look up at the soaring, sunlit ceiling of the main hall, her face filled with wonder, I know, with a certainty that fills my entire soul, that this is what true power looks like. It's not about building empires. It's about building hope.